Welcome to The Lost Signals Discusses Film and TV. Using the revolutionary Manzur-Mosi Thurlow scale,
or MOTS,
we scrupulously review these art forms with an emphasis on narrative structure. Join us for another entertaining episode.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Lost Signals Discusses Film and Television. Today we're doing a special event, the Ignominious History of Alan Smithee. I'm your host, Alan Smithee, joined here today by Alan Smithee Jr.
Hello?
Alan Smithee Sr.
How's it going?
And Ellen Smithee.
Hi, that's spelled with two Y's and an I.
Of course it is.
So, if you don't know who Alan Smithee is, I think it was 68,
I believe that's correct.
developed a pseudonym that a director could take in Hollywood when they wanted to disown their association with a work. And it's an interesting concept. And it kind of died in the early 2000s.
Well, it died because of a movie that you might
Yes.
talk about later on, but...
But today we're going to
Certainly will.
discuss the history and the great works of art produced by Alan Smithee. So, Steve-O, would you like to begin with a brief history of Alan Smithee?
Absolutely. So this pseudonym, we read up a bit about it and learned that it was developed for this movie called Death of a Gunslinger, which the movie actually came out in 1969. There was apparently a movie that came out in 1968 by Alan Smithee as well, but as far as I could tell, it was developed for this movie.
This is the first official,
And the reason
documented use.
that the Directors Guild started using it was because on Death of a Gunslinger, the original director was kind of shoved off by the star of the movie. What was his name? What was
Richard
his name?
Widmark.
Richard Widmore. Richard Widmore. And
Mark.
Richard Widmark. I apologize. And so throughout the filming, they brought in a new director. That director that came back on decided that he didn't want credit for the movie because he didn't do very much of it. And the original director didn't want any credit because he fucking hated the entire production at that point. And so the Directors Guild came up with this idea that if nobody wanted to take credit for a movie, we're going to attribute it to Alan Smithee. Actually, I think originally it was supposed to be Al Smith.
Yeah.
And then they were like, way too many people have that name. We can't do that.
Too obvious.
Yeah. So it went to Alan Smithee. I believe in one of the in Ebert's review of the movie, he said that I'd never heard of this Alan Smithee character, but
his film's pretty good.
he did a pretty good job in directing. So the movie apparently was pretty solid, but because of strangeness, contract strangeness, I guess.
Because of some kind of meddling
it was
and
attributed to
falling
someone
out.
who didn't exist, and people started using this pseudonym for things that they didn't want to be a part of. A couple of other movies that had the Alan Smithee name attributed to it throughout history. Birds 2 was a big
there's
one.
been a lot of them, but these are some highlights.
There are a lot of them, but and just go on the Wikipedia page or go on to IMDb and look up Alan Smithee.
Yeah, look up Alan Smithee at IMDb. I encourage you to do that for sure.
It's a lot of
It's
fun.
really funny.
You just go down a rabbit hole for a while. But like Birds 2, the sequel to the Hitchcock movie, was attributed to Alan Smithee, and it was supposed to be pretty bad. David Lynch took the pseudonym at one point for Dune.
Mm-hmm. That's probably one of the most famous cases, at least now
Right.
in retrospect.
The 4-hour cut.
Yeah.
A movie that we reviewed was directed by Alan Smithee,
Mhm.
a Hellraiser Bloodline.
Yep.
I believe the first segment of the Twilight Zone movie was
The one from
an Alan Smithee
one from
production.
85 or whatever?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, the original movie version. And so I think it's pretty interesting. Another big one, not big, but like another one that like caught my attention when I was reading about it was there was a short-lived spin-off to Columbo called Mrs. Columbo that got the Smithee
Wasn't even a movie
tagline to it.
The TV. Yeah.
Which I think is hilarious. And I kind of want to see Mrs. Columbo now. I don't know about
I kind of don't, but it's funny that Alan Smithee did.
And there are a bunch more that go into that, but there's kind of a name and one more that we're definitely going to talk about, so I won't mention it right now. But it's a really interesting history of like directors that want to disown their films, just use
For some
this
reason.
name. And so at this point, it's been discontinued, which we're also going to talk about. The use of Alan Smithee, and in terms of Directors Guild members. But there are definitely a bunch of other pseudonyms in use, or at least one or probably several other pseudonyms in use right now for directors who want to disown their works, which I think is really interesting. A couple other ones I want to mention, like so there are like re-edit disownings
There's like
of
subdivisions.
things. Like if you go to like, so people were like, oh, you destroyed my film by like re-editing for TV. Like one of the big ones is Micho Black. I think Heat is another one. And so I don't know. I think it's a really interesting history. There's a lot of cool reference material that you can look at for this, and maybe I think I'll try to add some of that to the liner notes that we have for this episode, so you can go and like check out some of it for yourself.
I'll give you some more info.
Definitely take a look.
I just have a quick addendum to that.
Yeah.
It is actually very interesting because music videos, like all of these different things you don't think of that
some point employed
like that
someone
just
employed
used Alan Smithee.
So that point is interesting because there are still people that use the name Alan Smithee. You just can't be in the Directors Guild and use it.
And officially use it, sure.
So like there are people that use it outside of the Directors Guild who are directing things on their own that still use the name, and to funny effect, or because they want to disown whatever the hell garbage they produced or had to produce because whoever was whoever was messing with it.
One thing
like
that's funny to tie that together, David Fincher directed music videos, and his feature debut was Alien 3. And he tried to get his name taken off it. He couldn't do it. And then when they did the reassemble cut for the quadrology box set, he tried to get his name taken off that. But
did they do it for the quadrology?
No, they kept it. They
like,
didn't
fuck you, you're staying.
Well, there are several times where people tried to get their names taken off of movies, and the Directors Guild was like, no dice.
Yeah. Well, I want to go more into
which
that.
is another interesting thing.
Second,
but I'm gonna leave that.
Go on, Chris.
No, I was just gonna say, because you mentioned music video, and I'm like, that was one of the things that's brought up. But I also come back to Hellraiser 4. I remember seeing it in the theater, and I remember looking at the movie poster, waiting to get in line. I'm like, I never heard of this guy, Alan Smithee. What else did he direct?
You're like Roger Ebert at that point.
And this is a few years. This is like in the mid '90s, so it was a few years before the internet. So it wasn't until I actually was in LA before I found out about Alan Smithee. I'm like, oh, really?
Sure. Well, that's the thing. So maybe I'll toss it to you, E, because I want to talk about more like how it's used and like why it's become known. But there's a movie that sort of like did that, like put it in the spotlight. So, and you just recently watched it.
Oh, Burn Hollywood, Burn, Alan Smithee.
An Alan Smithee film.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell
directed by
the sort of history?
Directed by Alan Smithee, about Alan
film?
Smithee.
All right.
All things Alan Smithee.
So this has I believe, an 8% rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
Very low approval rating.
It got a 0 by Roger Ebert. I watched it today. So it's a mockumentary about a director whose name is actually Alan Smithee, attempting to disown because an editor or producer / editor ruins his
executives
movie.
fucked up his film,
and he can't because it's his name anyway. And so, who are how'd you list the people?
So the director was Arthur Hiller, Alan Smithee himself, and the writer is Joe Esterhaus.
Joe Esterhaus was also played a lot of roles in here. Won 4 Golden Raspberries for this.
For all of them.
But so the director said that he wanted Alan Smithee because the editor ruined it. The editor says that he was there the entire time, and it was just a stunt gag for him to go by Alan Smithee. So I'm going to say that the movie is actually not that bad, and I'm unsure of why it has the reputation it does. it got a few chuckles. I mean, I'd maybe give it a 6 or 7 if I
know,
were doing
okay,
a
sure.
But nonetheless, I watched The Death of Alan Smithee because after this movie came out, the Directors Guild, and this guy, the director, was actually president of the Directors Guild for a while.
Really? There you go.
Said that we're retiring the name. No one can use this anymore because this has gotten too meta for our liking.
Well, I thought it was that. So yeah, like I didn't know like the fact that there's a disagreement about whether or not he was there the whole time and it was like it's a stunt or not. But regardless, if I understand it, was such a public spat that it put the fact that the Alan Smithee pseudonym was in use for like 30 years, 40 years in Hollywood into the public light. Yeah. So therefore, the GGA was like, all right, now the secret's out now. Like everyone's gonna know if we use it, so we have to like, basically retire it.
Well, I forget who it was, but there was somebody who got denied because he had such a public falling out with the studio that they were like, you can't take Alan Smithee because everyone's gonna know it's you, man.
Yeah. So like, there's been instances like that. Was all I'm saying. But like, as far as I understood, like previous to this, doing somewhat of my own like research before this about Burn Hollywood Burn is like because again it was thrust into the public limelight that they disagreed so much and they wanted to use it, and of course like metally / ironically it was an Alan Smithee film, like it was a mockumentary about that very thing. So therefore I thought that was really funny.
Yeah, way too meta for anyone's taste in Hollywood.
It is great.
I was thinking because Walter Hill's Supernova, which is a complete disaster mess of a movie, he tried to get Alan Smithee and he couldn't do it. But that reminded me of like a lot of times is commonplace to replace a director, and I immediately thought of Solo, and I'm like, but if Solo, if it wasn't, I mean, was this a contender for an Alan Smithee film? Considering that late in the production, these two guys were pulled out.
Maybe maybe one of them was Alan.
I mean, I liked the movie. I enjoyed it. It wasn't like a good movie, but
think Ron Howard wanted to get Alan Smithee himself on it. I don't know.
I just thought of that. I'm like, huh.
I mean, that's kind of funny. But no, like the thing I wanted to bring up was like, having said that, so having covered sort of a broad history, in case you didn't know, like that's like where it came from and how it was used. But now, like I didn't know about it. Like I recently found out about it. Like maybe like possibly because of when we did Hellraiser that time, and like someone pointed out to one of you, probably Chris or you, pointed out like I never knew that or thought about it. And then when we started talking about doing an episode about it, we all did some more research and like it goes back a long time because again it was sort of like a well kept like under wraps thing in Hollywood until it blew up. But I think it's really funny, like amusing that you don't like what other medium does that. I guess novels can sort of you can have a pseudonym, but there's no one that's known, right? That's so widely like spread, or many authors have used it. So I think like it's sort of a PSA I'm considering this episode for all of you out there that if you ever go back and see a movie and you see directed by or even written any credits that says it, you know that somebody somewhere was like dissatisfied or didn't want their name attached to it.
Might I interrupt before you go? Because I know you're gonna talk about your section of this, but when you mentioned Walter Hill, that jogged a memory in my mind. He actually did get a pseudonym for that movie.
Yeah,
for Supernova, he went by Thomas Lee.
Yeah,
sure.
So like that was 2000. That was right after the use of Alan Smithee. Yeah.
Well, you brought up literature. I immediately thought of Christopher Moore, or not Christopher. What am I saying? Jesus.
I don't know.
Oh, Shakespeare.
Never know what he's saying.
I totally screwed that up.
Shakespeare went by Alan Smithee. That's awesome.
No, but there is Marlowe, Christopher Marlowe.
Yes.
But I immediately thought of the fact that when I first saw Hellraiser, it was like 95,
Bloodline, 96. I assume.
Yeah. Bloodline. Oh yeah, I saw it in the theater.
I believe that's the only one that is.
Oh hell yeah, dude! In the theater, man, all the way.
Anyway,
but I was
your favorite Hellraiser.
But the thing is, before the internet, before we could all look this up, I mean, there was really unless
how would you know?
Unless you read industry publications or whatever, you wouldn't know. So it's funny they retired the name right when the internet was taking off.
I'm sort of on the cusp of that. Sure. So like now, again, like I said, like now that it's known, that now I believe the DJ, if there are using pseudonyms, which I believe they are, like probably more than one. I think you mentioned Steve-O, that they're not gonna they're gonna keep it even more under wraps until something else like
they're certainly trying. But again, as Chris just said, the internet's a very powerful thing.
It leaks out.
Like, as I said, 2000. Walter Hill did Supernova, and I don't know how quickly it came out after that, but it definitely went under the name Thomas Lee. That was Walter Hill.
I mean,
if anyone's interested.
I mean, if Angela Bassett should have gotten a pseudonym for that one,
maybe.
Because who else? It was Alan. It was her and Ultron were in it,
It's tough to get a pseudonym when your face is on the screen.
I know, but it was,
and you're famous already.
we obviously you haven't seen the film. If I were her in Ultron there, whose name I'm blocking, I definitely would have been like,
All right.
Her and Ultron.
see, digitally remove us, please.
Okay, good to know.
Are you done
Anyway,
with your?
No, I'm just like again,
No,
like
just got-
I just think it's amusing in general. And like I said, if you're not familiar with it now, hopefully you know because of us. And if it's really funny, and maybe you can like, for example, this is an own personal story, but I thought it was funny, like be a very petty thing for my office space job that I have in the daytime. That over my nameplate at work on my cube, I just put Alan Smithee as if to distance myself from the company that I just like come to loathe so much. So like if you're like, for example, like use it in real life, you know, like you meet somebody at a bar, whatever, like party, whatever you're doing, you're like you don't like this person, you're like, oh, by the way, what's your name, man? Just be like, oh, I'm Alan Smithee, nice to meet you. Like,
Please
Yeah.
send us videos or pictures of you using Alan Smithee in clever ways.
yeah, if it's
I would love that.
Maybe we'll put it on Instagram.
sure, but like yeah, if you can like if you know about it now and other people don't, then it's sort of like a
Not maybe. I'll definitely put it on Instagram. Sure.
sort of like a stealth insult that you can use
Yeah.
against people or against other things. Like maybe write a report or something like, I'm putting Alan Smithee on this one.
All right, Chris, you had a segment you wanted to do.
Yeah, as I was doing research on Alan Smithee, of course, me the Trekkie has to always bring the science fiction in one way or another in on it.
What
Yes,
surprise!
Spock,
Chris
what are you
doing a
saying?
Star Trek thing.
But I was thinking they brought up DC Fontana. They brought up
Spock shirt on.
yeah. I got my Spock shirt on. I got
Which one of those faces is Spock being Alan Smithee?
All of them. This one, the one in the center. They got a Brady Bunch kind
Okay.
of thing.
Sorry for anyone listening. to
Yeah,
this, but-
anybody listening, I've got the Emotions of Spock T-shirt, and I've got my little Spock avatar on
Look it up.
on the desk. Look us up.
Oh, the Spocks.
All right. So anyway, I was looking up
Go
Alan
on.
Smithee, and it directed me to Star Trek, and of course that's like moth to flame there. And I was thinking on the subject of pseudonyms, DC Fontana, and about how women used to, and still extent now with J.K. Rowling and so forth, use their initials so nobody knows it's not a man. And what I found was really interesting is DC Fontana, in order to get the work she did, not just on Star Trek, but a couple other things,
Sure.
she had to go by DC instead of Dorothy Catherine.
Put those glasses
But
on.
but sometimes the stuff that she
Oh,
wrote for
man.
Star Trek or something was so awful, she had to come up with a pseudonym for her pseudonym.
Double pseudonym.
So I always thought
She smithied herself.
she smithied herself.
She
So she
smithied her
went,
own pseudonym.
DC Fontana had to go for like J. Michael Bingham as one of her yeah, because one of her scripts was screwed up because Roddenberry wanted to focus more on his creator's pet.
Is that a dig on
Wesley-
Straczynski?
What?
I don't know. You think she intended it as
I was
such?
just gonna say, is that
Doubt
a
it.
dig on Straczynski?
No. This is before
Yeah.
J. Michael Straczynski, and she did write for Babylon 5.
Maybe
so.
she is J. Michael Straczynski.
See, now the nightmare is you'll never know.
She's a comic book writer for like the last 35 years.
If we- I hope if you get nothing else out of this, that now you'll question every single credit you ever see, whether or not it's a fake
Yeah,
name.
question reality, question, who's writing or directing the art.
Or any of these people real, or at least if it's their real names.
I hope not.
Yeah, so I thought
That'd be
that
amazing.
I thought that was interesting that, for a long
They're all
time that
parasites.
women had to use some sort of pseudonym and that these
Right,
people
that's a legit thing that you don't often think about or isn't
Yeah.
as well known. Sure.
But not because they wanted to distance themselves from their work, but because they wanted to be able to
They weren't like ashamed of their work.
get their work out there so
Exactly.
they
Yeah,
could take
they-
credit for it.
Yeah, so they,
Yeah, sort of
they
in
had to come
reverse.
up with a pseudonym to get their work out there, but when somebody would
Oppo.
screw it up, they didn't even want their pseudonym tarnished, so they'd come up with a pseudonym for the pseudonym.
Oppo Alan Smithee.
Which is a harsh thing to have to do, but that's,
Yeah, so like women,
that's the system, I suppose. You're right.
Not anymore, baby.
Okay, anyone have any
Ladies
final,
everywhere. Sorry.
final thoughts?
Other than Steve-O babbling, I don't know.
Alan Smithee.
I'm Alan Smithing myself from this episode, of course.
I think we all
But
know.
no, just my final thought is like, again, if you hadn't known about this, hopefully now you'll think it's amusing and it's funny, and you can go back and if you happen to see any films that you used to see or just see something on TV, like, fake name, whoever directed it or wrote it or whatever, like didn't like it, didn't want it, and again, use it in your personal life and troll people with it.
Well, I'm Mark Twain, and I'm here with...
Oh, Jesus Christ. I didn't think I was going to have to come up with a pseudonym. No, I'm Jesus Christ.
Good pseudonym. And I'm Alan E. Smithy this time. Good night.
Throat Wobbler Mangrove.
Okay.
Throat wobbler.
And
Throat
with that,
wobbler.
we'll see you next time.
That's an esoteric reference.
Editing and engineering by Christopher Morgan. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates. Or mods?